Hello and welcome to Solely Singleton, episode 180. I'm your host, Eric, and today we've got an interesting and exciting topic. Brad's not here, so I'm in charge, and it's that time of the year, so I've got a special guest with me. We've got the caretaker of Cthulhu, CavsFangelo himself, back to the show. How's it going?
I'm doing pretty good, Eric. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I can't speak, but, it's not like we're on an audio podcast or anything.
No, not at all. See, thankfully, you've got editors. No one will know.
So on this episode, we're going to go into Halloween horror trope type stuff. You've got the horror cube. You've done a lot of that stuff, so...
Yeah, gonna get some good spooky vibes going.
You have a cube that's focused on horror as the genre.
Yes, so I run and maintain a cube called the Cube of Cthulhu. A lot of people will stick to cards that are strictly printed in Innistrad sets or are clearly set on the plane of Innistrad.
Right, like if it's an external supplementary set, but it's like, this is an Innistrad card. It's just in an EDH deck or M set or whatever.
Yeah, 100%. Whereas for me, it was like, I don't know, like, I've always loved the art in Magic, and it's like, there's so many cool cards that perfectly fit this flavor that are on other planes that I could pull in, that I pull them all in. So the majority of my cube is from, the 7 main Innistrad sets, but I've got cards from Shadowmoor. I had a beta card in my cube for a while. I got cards from Eldraine, various different Dominaria sets. I go all over as long as I feel like I can actually justify its inclusion in kind of the look and feel of my cube.
Okay, so yeah, you're kind of branched out into like, this is a horror cube. It's not an Innistrad cube.
100%. What I've always really kind of appreciated about that set is it's great from a flavor perspective, but mechanically it's also so well done and like perfectly dialed in. You have so many interesting kind of decks that you can draft from it. And all of those drafts, they all feel weird. You know what I mean? Like that spider spawning deck where you're milling yourself to make this huge like array of spiders, like that's not a typical draft deck. That's such a weird thing for a draft deck to be doing, but it feels so perfectly at home in a horror theme where everything is a little off and weird.
Yeah, that was part of why drafting that was so fun, was like your traditional decks sort of worked, but like you could really have some fun and do some wild stuff.
Yeah, it's like I kind of want my creatures to die to get my morbid triggers.
Yeah.
Or, I'm going to take this turn off to flip all my werewolves and then kill you next turn. You're doing weird things that are very atypical and they just feel off, but it all works.
Yeah.
So, cosmic horror has always been notoriously really, really hard to adapt into visual mediums.
Right.
I think Shadows itself is a fantastic set. I think they absolutely nailed like that beginning setup to a cosmic horror story where you have a protagonist, in this case it's Jace, investigating this mystery, which in this case is why Avacyn went from being, the guardian of mankind to burning people in the street and killing everybody.
Yeah. With like all of the like things are not quite right aspect of like, what's the problem here?
Well, and that's what I really loved about that set. I remember as spoilers were coming out, Wizards like need some kind of respect for what they did with this set. Like they did a really good job of like putting that main central mystery of Avacyn forward while not calling attention to all of the subtly creepy and weird and off stuff that was hidden in the art of that set.
Yes.
You would see all these like weird little details that Wizards was never calling to mind and just letting you find. Like, I remember there was this card called Manic Scribe, where it's like a person sitting at a desk and like they're furiously scribbling on a sheet of paper because they just can't stop writing gibberish. And then as you look at that card, you see that the quill pen that she's writing with is stabbed through her palms and she's writing in blood. And it's like, well, that's creepy and really unsettling.
Yes.
And then as you look closer, you realize she has 6 fingers. And one of her fingers is like curled around in a spiral shape, which a finger would not do.
Yeah, I don't actually remember the quill through the hand, but I do remember the weird hand.
Yeah. Or there was another one. It was a red vampire called Incorrigible Youths.
Yes.
Where the card portrayed a bunch of like vampire kids eating somebody. So you have this like really grotesque image that's in the forefront where you're immediately drawn to, oh, this dude's getting eaten by this pack of vampire kids.
Uh-huh.
But then as you look at it more, you start to realize like, oh, that kid has another face growing out of his neck. And that one has a bunch of eyes on his hand.
Okay.
And that one's hand is a tentacle. Like...
Yeah.
Yeah, and like mechanically that set was all about like investigating and slowly succumbing to madness and your delirious state like increasing. And it was just like, God, this is so good. This is so cool. Like they've created this like mystery in the story and they've planted all these little seeds in the art that makes the player want to solve the mystery. And mechanically, they're solving this mystery in the set. And it's just so well done. I don't know who the art director on that set is, but like they did a fantastic job with that.
Yeah.
And then it all came to a head in Eldritch Moon.
Yep.
Which is almost there. The Eldrazi mechanic of Emerge, it's like so visceral where it's like, oh, my cultist is literally exploding into like this wretched griff or whatever I'm emerging. It's like, God, this is so well done. And then I look one more card further and Gideon is punching something in the face. And it's just like, oh God, there it goes. It's all gone. It's so close. And like in my cube, I can just choose to not include the cheesier parts of the set that I think ruined it.
Right. This set does have one of Christian's most favoritist cards ever in Lone Rider.
Oh, it does. So yeah, Shadows, you know, I'll give it a solid B.
I mean, you've talked about like the fact that your cube isn't just Innistrad.
For a while, Eldraine, I think, was the highest represented non-Innistrad set in my cube. It's kind of come down over time.
That's fair.
But man, there were so many good, weird horror cards for me. Yeah, that set was really cool. There's a lot of really cool stuff from that.
Honestly, just even ignoring horror as a trope, the set was fantastic. Knocked it out of the park. I thoroughly enjoyed that set.
Also, weirdly, I found a lot of cards from like Ravnica sets. I don't think Ravnica is really a setting that I think people would think of when it comes to horror, but and you stop and think about it, like Orzhov has afterlife and a lot of spirits.
Yeah.
Dimir is always doing like weird, creepy stuff in the basement. Izzet are like kind of mad scientists, so they kind of got the whole Dr. Frankenstein trope down.
That's true.
Found, you know, a lot of good stuff there. I didn't even mention New Phyrexia.
Oh, yeah?
That was a big omission on my part. Yeah, New Phyrexia is another big kind of horror set, and they've already announced that the upcoming return to New Phyrexia is going to be horror-themed. I'm presuming that's probably going to be based around body horror, which I'm kind of skeptical will translate well to Magic.
The whole, like, completed thing.
Yeah, I don't know how well that's going to work in a game that seemingly does not want to go past PG-13.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of that issue with Shadows and Eldritch Moon where, you know, cosmic horror is really hard to adapt.
Yeah.
And now you're going to try to do a genre that is like David Cronenberg's remake of The Fly from the 1980s. I don't want to see a Magic card where someone's like pulling their fingernails out or like vomiting on their food to eat it. You know, like...
I remember that movie. I did not enjoy it. I did not like it. It did not bring me joy. So yeah, New Phyrexia, I'm skeptical it's going to be good, but hopefully you get at least a few cards. So we've kind of touched throughout this on like generally what happens with cubes is you have, here's my restrictions. Now I figure out what's going on.
Yep.
So what were your main restrictions on designing?
Yeah, so I think for me, to me, the most important thing I wanted is I wanted the cube to be as flavorful as it could be. So I remember something that I found really inspiring. Someone had posted on the Cube subreddit where they had made a draft cube of original Innistrad and they put it in a box that they did up to look like a vampire hunting kit. So there's like a mallet and a stake, and all the cards are packed in like old leather-bound books that this guy ripped apart. And I was just like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And it was like, for me, it's like, I don't have the patience to put together that physical presentation of the cube.
Yeah.
But I can kind of nail what the board state would look like in that game. You know what I mean? Like, I can find the cards that would belong and deserve to be in a cube like that.
Right.
So for me, flavor was absolutely my top priority. To the point where, like, I'm not going to put a dragon in my cube because I don't think a dragon would belong in a horror cube.
Right.
So for me, it was all flavor first. And I think something that's really important for people if they're going to sit down and build a themed cube like this is, like, ask yourself why you're doing it and figure out what that guiding design principle or principles are.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that kind of really quickly came from that is, like, for me, flavor is more important than sticking to singleton. So if I can only find one flavorful burn spell, I'll just run 2 of it, you know?
Okay.
Like, if I can't find enough red 2/1s for one to make an aggro deck, I'll run multiples of the ones that I do have, because I want the flavor, and I think that's more important than having every card be unique.
It makes sense, because if you're focusing on flavor first as like the design core aspect, then to make the decks work, to make the cube fun, you have to figure out how to do it. And if you're not going to bend your rules on flavor, then bending the rules on singleton makes sense.
Yeah, and for me, you know, kind of my secondary thing was, I want flavor to be first, but I also want the games to be fun, and I want drafting to be challenging and rewarding. So, you know, the singleton breaks allow me to do that. That way I'm making sure that people are having meaningful picks and they're not drafting garbage because that's the only flavorful thing that I have. And honestly, over time, that's gotten a lot easier as more cards have been printed and my card pool has expanded. But there was a time where I had to run a card called Seagraph Scab, or Scab. I've never been certain how to actually pronounce Skaab.
Yeah.
And it's just a 1/3 for 1 and a blue, but it's a zombie. And it's like, that's what I got. You know, that's...
Yeah, not really good.
No, and thankfully I don't have to run cards like that anymore, but, you know,
Yeah.
early on, kind of that decision between flavor and, like, meaningful gameplay and power, that was a lot harder to balance. I think building something like this today would be a lot easier than it was, you know, back when I only had 2 Innistrad blocks available. And, like, the other thing you'll find, at least for me, is it was like, hey, I could find a lot of sets that had a lot of heavy horror influence, and it was really, really easy for me to put my black section together.
Yeah.
Green? It's a lot harder. You know, like, even those sets that had a lot of, like, horror influence, you know, by the time I get around to looking at, like, what's available in green, it's like, I got nothing, man. I got some wolves. Like...
We kind of got some monster thingies, but, like...
Yeah, I got some beasts.
Yeah.
Don't have werewolves anywhere but Innistrad.
Right.
Good thing that's one of my tribes.
Yeah, there's, like, wolves or spiders.
Oh, I tried the spider thing.
Goyfs?
I do have a Goyf in my cube now. I do have man, I am never going to be able to say this one. Urborg Lurgoyf.
I love that card.
Oh, yeah. As soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, this is cater made for me. It's in Teamer, it self-mills. Oh, it's fantastic.
From figuring that out, you still have to kind of figure out, like, the core parts of cube. I mean, like what's the size?
Yeah, that was a mistake I definitely made early on, too. You know, I started with my cube at a 450.
Okay.
And that worked. Then I pushed it to a 540. And that worked.
Yeah.
And then, like I mentioned earlier, I had my love affair with, like, sub-archetypes. And I was like, oh, I can put an invisible stalker thing in. And I can put spider tribal in.
Heck yeah.
I could put, like, Boros equipment in, which this is long before that was actually viable.
Yeah.
So I blew the cube up to 630, and I immediately reversed it. You know, I spent like a month thinking of ads, building the cube out, and then every single test draft I did on Cube Tutor was just awful. And it was like, you know, my card pool is not strong enough to support a cube of this size. I think that's a thing about cube design that people forget, at a certain point. It's like, this is all arbitrary. You can do whatever the hell you want.
Yeah, I mean, we pick 360, 450. There are logical reasons to it for pack distribution, but like, at the end of the day, it's pretty fucking arbitrary. You talked about black being easy to fill. Did you ever have a time where you're just like, I'm just not going to fill green out and it's just going to be a support color?
I'm very anal retentive about things, so I am someone who...
No, a Magic player that's a cube designer?
I know, right? Shocking. Also, I'm a little bit of a hypocrite, because even though I was just talking about how this is all arbitrary, I really like balance and symmetry in my cubes, sometimes to a fault.
Yeah.
So I always wanted to have a color-balanced cube.
Okay.
Which is really difficult with a theme like mine. I remember when Brad first looked at it, like, he was shocked that it was color-balanced. Like, he had thought that it was going to be, like, base black. And it's like, nope, color-balanced. Took a lot of work to get to that.
Yeah.
But I think what's beneficial when you're building a cube like this is kind of, once you have your pool together, is kind of look at the colors and see, like, what each one can actually support in your cube.
Okay.
So green is a good example. Like, I initially tried to do like a ramp deck, but I don't have mana dorks available to me.
Yeah, that's kind of fundamental to a ramp deck.
Yeah, it's like Ashnod's Altar can only do so much, and it's not going to support an entire ramp archetype in a cube.
And I don't think I can really convince you on Birds of Paradise being a horror.
No, probably not.
That's a tough stretch, huh?
A little bit. But kind of what I did is I just kind of looked and it's like, all right, what does green do in Innistrad? Emerge and Morbid. Those go together really well. I eventually kind of ripped that deck out and instead went into the whole self-mill spider spawning thing.
Yeah.
Because as I got around to blue was doing a lot of self-mill. Black cares about the graveyard. There's the whole spider spawning thing. And I kind of realized that that's a much more synergistic pairing when I look at what blue is doing.
Yeah.
That's kind of like an example of like kind of the iterative design you're going to take. You might find a thing that works. Then when you're looking at like other colors in your cube, you realize there's something else that might work a little bit better. So, but as a result, you know, if you look at my cube, the colors are very different than what you would expect from a more normal cube. My blue section is considerably more creature heavy than any other cube.
Yeah, I mean, it's very tempo oriented.
Yeah, very much. And a lot of that is like, I don't have the same amount of like counter spells as a normal cube does. I'm doing a lot of like 3 mana counter spells with set mechanic type stuff. I don't have Treasure Cruise. I don't have Dig Through Time. I don't have Ponder or Preordain. You know, all those cube staples.
Yeah, it's big.
I can't run them. I gotta dig deep. I got like Mental Note.
I like Thought Scour.
Oh yeah, I mean those are great cards. And I was happy when I saw Brad put them in.
Yeah. I mean, that said, your black section is like whatever you want.
Oh yeah, black I can put whatever I want. There is no Reanimator deck in this cube. I just want you to be absolutely aware of that. You're going to expect it. It's not here.
Right.
And the reason it's not there is it's like, I could put the entirety of a Vintage Cube's Reanimator deck into my cube, and it will win every single cube pod.
You could put the whole deck in your cube, and it'd thematically fit.
It would all fit.
I like the idea of just being like, no, that's not where we're going with this.
There are the things in my cube. It is winning a game off of Emrakul, and it is winning a game off of Triskaidekaphobia, which, I'll be real, no one has ever done.
No? Oh my god.
No.
I would draft that every single time until it happened. Like, I would never give up until I made it happen.
I did once, unfortunately, deprive my opponent of that win by chucking a Fiery Temper at my face to avoid it.
Oh, that's awful.
I did feel like a real jerk for that.
That's a big brain play. I like it.
You'll be happy to know, though, I have lost to my own Triskaidekaphobia. So I've lost to it. I've just never won off it. So I guess in a way you can say my opponent won off at that game. So I guess technically someone has had that accomplishment.
Somebody has accomplished winning with Triskaidekaphobia. Even though they didn't mean to.
Mm-hmm. So like one of the things I do with this cube, I got this idea from my buddy Ben, who he was running hand rear battlements.
Yeah.
And if you draft Battlements, you get Garrison from the token box, free to throw in your deck if you want to. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I can do that with that card. I can do that with Gisela in white. And then I was like, I kind of want to do one of these for every color. I want to have like one card that has a guarantee combo thing. So in my cube, if you draft Triskaidekaphobia, you also happen to get a free copy of Infamous Tree of Perdition. If I can have a drafter leave the table and be excited because they drafted Scuttletide, and then I gave them a copy of Hard Evidence, and then they just made the whole like crab-based Delirium deck, I've done a good job. You know, that makes me a happy cube designer.
I know what Scuttletide is now when you say the Delirium Crab deck.
Yep, dude, please, make the crab army. Go for it. Like, I want to see that.
That's just good fun.
Yeah, it is. Magic as Richard Garfield intended.
Some cubes will be cutthroat. Other cubes are going to be more like this, where it's like, this is a theme, there's flavor, and during the entire draft, I want you to have this experience.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just awesome.
Thank you. That makes me happy as like a cube builder, you know, like that's the most I can ask for, is that people kind of like get what I'm doing and they have a good time with it. And like every time I've drafted this cube, it's been a blast, you know, like.
I can imagine. I mean, I haven't had a chance to draft it yet, but just looking through it, there's a lot of things that I'm like, I'd try and big brain myself into doing something dumb and have so much fun doing it. The cube looks exactly like my dream of like a pod cube.
But yeah, you know, it's like, hey, Halloween's coming up. I'm drafting this, you know, the last Saturday in October.
Yeah.
I got a Goyf now in my cube. Like, yeah, man, I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be super cool.
But with that, I think we've probably talked enough about horror for today, at least. I'm sure you'll be back at some point.
Oh, yeah. I think we've done good work here today, Eric. I feel really good about this conversation. This was a good time. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. And without any further ado, let's just jump into the outro.